Caitlin Clark and
I'm a fan.
Angel Reese, right?
Yeah.
They're going back and
I'm a
forth.
fan of both.
And Jamil Hill says by the time Angel Reese is done, she's going to be the Michael Jordan of WNBA.
She said about Angel Reese?
She said Angel Reese, by the time she retires, can you pull up this quote? She said, by the time she retires, she will be the MJ of, go to Jamil Hill, type in Jamil Hill, yeah. She says, by the time she retires, Jamil Hill has made a bold prediction that Angel Reese will become the MJ.
Imagine walking into an arena where 20,000 people have one singular goal, watching you fail. The air is suffocating. Signs held high, voices absolutely deafening before you even step foot on the hardwood. The opposing team looking at you like you're the villain they've been waiting to defeat all season long. This wasn't just another game. This was the moment where everything that had been building behind the scenes finally exploded on court. Caitlin Clark didn't walk into a basketball game that night. She walked straight into an ambush orchestrated, and hurling insults went completely silent. The crowd that came prepared to celebrate their star player watched in stunned disbelief as Caitlin delivered the kind of performance that changes careers, shifts narratives, and gets replayed for years. This is the story of how one missed layup and one dominant performance redefined an entire rivalry. 2 days before the opening tip, Angel Reese stood in front of cameras at a pregame press conference and made a claim that would echo through sports media for weeks. She didn't just talk about her game. She didn't just discuss her brand or her growing influence in women's basketball. Instead, she drew a direct line between her trajectory and the greatest basketball player to ever live. Reese allegedly compared her competitive drive and cultural impact to Michael Jordan. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a player making a statement that practically screamed she was becoming the true face of the league, not Caitlin Clark, not anyone else, just her. The weight of those words was immediately understood by everyone paying attention. The internet didn't need much angle. Fans took sides with the kind of passion usually reserved for major political debates. But nobody in the sports world reacted with the answers. This moment demanded his attention, and he answered the call with surgical precision. Stephen A. didn't just disagree with Reese's comparison. He went on live television and delivered a comprehensive breakdown that systematically dismantled the argument piece by piece. His core point was surgical and direct. Angel Reese was confusing popularity and brand attention with generational basketball greatness. Yes, Reese had built an impressive personal brand. Yes, she thrived in controversial moments. Yes, she had become a lightning rod for media attention and viral clips. The cultural footprint she had created was undeniable. But Stephen A. emphasized something crucial that separated this from actual legacy building. Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan by proving everything on the court first, before the brand ever existed. The historical precedent was crucial to understand. He put up numbers. He won championships. He silenced critics through performance. The cultural impact, the endorsements, the global brand, all of that came after he had already proven he was the best basketball player on the planet. You don't get to reverse that order. You don't get to build the brand first and then try to prove you deserve it on the court. That's not how legacy works in professional basketball. Stephen A.'s warning cut to the heart of something that Reese seemed to be missing. The cart was before the horse. Stephen A.'s warning was direct and pointed. He essentially told Reese that making massive claims before backing them up on the hardwood was a dangerous game with consequences. He cautioned that when you make statements this bold, you're not just challenging your opponents. You're challenging the entire basketball world to test those claims. You're inviting scrutiny. You're creating a measuring stick against which every performance will be judged. And when you fail to deliver on that stage, it's not a minor setback. It becomes a defining moment. It becomes the narrative that follows you. The pressure of those words doesn't just disappear. It compounds with every game you play. What made Stephen A.'s critique even more impactful was the timing. This wasn't just random commentary buried in a segment nobody watched. This was national television, primetime ESPN, reaching millions of viewers before the game even happened. Reese's statement had been amplified, analyzed, debated, and then directly challenged by one of the most influential voices in sports media. The pressure wasn't subtle. It was as obvious as a spotlight directly on stage. For a player stepping into a hostile arena where 20,000 fans were already primed for drama, Adding a nationally televised criticism of your own claims into that mix was like pouring fuel on an already roaring fire. The thing about making Michael Jordan comparisons is that you're not just talking about skill level or statistics. You're talking about performing under pressure. You're talking about the mental fortitude to deliver when everything is on the line. You're talking about silencing doubt with performance, not with words.
Begins is who can actually deliver.
That's freaking awesome. That is awesome. Caitlin Clark, the only player in WNBA history to average 26 and 9 assists over a 10-game span. Ever. Ever. In the history of ever. Let's get to the game. It went to overtime, 95-91. Michaela Timpson, 20 points on 9 of 13. 7 rebounds, 1 block shot. Caitlin Clark, 26 on 9 of 20. 9 assists, 3 boards. Kelsey Mitchell, she extended the streak, come hell or high water. 20 points on 9 of 22. 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 steal. You wonder why I come down on Kelsey Mitchell for MVP? I'm sorry, but this rebounding and assist situation drives me crazy. So let's go to Angel Reese clocking Caitlin Clark right in the throat hole.
It's just 35.
Right here, you're going to watch. There she gets her in the neck, and there she gets her in the throat. Yeah. What are we doing? Neck, throat. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Protected species. Shout out House of Lowlights. Speaking of House of Lowlights, good chance I've got an Angel Reese video coming in the morning.
Michael Jordan didn't become legendary by predicting his own greatness in press conferences. He became legendary by showing up in moments that mattered most and absolutely dominating. He thrived when pressure was highest. He got better when stakes increased. The comparison wasn't just bold, it was a challenge to do exactly that. Angel Reese's comment also created a specific type of pressure that's fundamentally different from normal rivalry trash talk. This wasn't "I'm better than you at basketball." This wasn't "my team is going to beat your team." This was "I'm on a trajectory to become the greatest player of all time." That's not just competitive bravado. That's a claim about legacy, about impact, about being in the same conversation as the most dominant athlete basketball has ever seen. When you make that kind of statement, you're essentially saying that one game, particularly one game against your biggest rival, should demonstrate evidence of that claim. The media circus that followed was intense and relentless. Sports analysts who don't typically focus on women's basketball suddenly had opinions they needed to share. National outlets ran entire segments dissecting the comparison. Social media created hashtags and debates that dominated timelines. The narrative had completely shifted from opening game rivalry to "Can Angel Reese back up her Michael Jordan comparison?" The bar wasn't just performing well. The bar was performing at a Michael Jordan level. The bar was proving that the comparison wasn't just hype constructed for media attention. The bar was answering Stephen A. Smith's direct televised challenge on the biggest stage possible. What's fascinating is that Reese wasn't a player known for backing down from pressure or controversy. Throughout her career, she had thrived on drama. She had built her entire brand partially on being outspoken, polarizing, and willing to say things that others wouldn't say. That's part of why she had become such a lightning rod for attention. But there's a crucial difference between thriving on normal rivalry drama and thriving under the pressure of comparing yourself to the GOAT on national television right before facing your biggest rival. One is calculated brand building. One is stepping directly into a spotlight where your words will either be validated or exposed in the most public way imaginable. As the hours counted down to tip-off, Reese would have known exactly what was coming. She would have seen the clips of Stephen A. She would have heard the analysis. She would have known that the Michael Jordan comparison wasn't just casual commentary anymore. It was the story. It was what every single person in that arena would be thinking about when the game started. It was what every analyst would be referencing throughout the broadcast. She had essentially created a perfect storm where her own words became the pressure she'd have to overcome. The stage was set. The narrative was locked in. This was personal. This was layered with years of perceived slights, competitive tension, and a fundamental clash of styles and personalities that had been building since these two stars first faced each other. Caitlin Clark represented something different in women's basketball, a generational talent who had come into the league with massive fanfare, expectations that seemed almost impossible to meet, and the kind of shooting ability that changes how defenses operate. Angel Reese represented something equally compelling but fundamentally different, a player who thrived in chaos, who built her brand on being the counter-narrative, who refused to be overshadowed by any single competitor. She had established herself as someone who wasn't intimidated by hype or by facing off against the biggest names in the league. The dynamic between the first season had already provided plenty of fuel for this fire. Games had been physical in ways that made headlines. Moments had been controversial in ways that sparked national debates. Social media had exploded repeatedly. Fans had taken strong stances on both sides of the ledger, but heading into the second season, something felt different. The intensity had escalated beyond what even those who followed the league closely might have anticipated. The stakes felt higher in ways that were almost tangible. There was an understanding among everyone paying attention that this rivalry wasn't going away. It was only getting more intense with each passing week. Angel Reese, known for her ability to thrive in exactly these kinds of high-pressure, high-drama situations, had apparently decided to lean into the narrative even more aggressively than before. She seemed to sense that the intensity was building and that there was an opportunity to seize control of the narrative. She had built her entire brand on understanding media dynamics in ways that transcended normal player behavior. She knew how to create moments. She understood that in the modern sports landscape, being polarizing is often more valuable than being universally liked. Players who spark debate, who create controversy, who say things that get people talking, those players drive engagement in ways that quiet, efficient players never can. Reese had leaned into this approach throughout her entire career with remarkable success. She had built a massive following. She had achieved cultural relevance that extended beyond basketball circles. She had become one of the most talked-about players in the entire league. Every time she posted on social media, every time she made a controversial statement, every time she engaged in on-court drama, it generated discussion and engagement. Her brand was built on being the player people couldn't ignore. But the Michael Jordan comparison was different in fundamental ways. It wasn't just about being provocative or creating drama for entertainment value. It wasn't just another controversial statement designed to generate headlines for 48 hours. This was a specific claim about legacy and trajectory that demanded to be tested. This was a statement that practically invited the basketball world to scrutinize every single thing she did on the court. When you say something like that on camera, 2 days before facing your biggest rival, you're essentially inviting examination. You're creating a measuring stick. You're setting expectations that can only be met through absolutely dominant performance. The media circus that followed was relentless in ways that were almost suffocating. Every sports outlet was running the story with headlines designed to attract attention. Every analyst had an opinion they felt compelled to share. The discourse shifted from typical rivalry talk to something more existential, a debate about who was truly ascending as the face of women's basketball. Was it Caitlin Clark, who was performing at an elite level with historic efficiency on every metric that mattered? Or was it Angel Reese, who was building an undeniable personal brand and cultural presence that transcended traditional basketball metrics? The Michael Jordan comparison essentially forced the basketball world to choose. It forced people to pick a side. It created a binary that didn't have to exist before. What made the 48 hours before tip-off so crucial was that both players knew exactly what was at stake in ways that went beyond normal game preparation. For Reese, there was the weight of her own words hanging over every possession she would play. For Clark, there was the validation that came with being the implicit answer to Reese's claim. If Stephen A. Smith had essentially said, "Reese is wrong, Clark is the real generational talent," then this game became a referendum on that debate. It became a chance for Clark to prove the analysts right and silence the doubters. It became a chance for Reese to prove them wrong and validate her own narrative. The venue itself added another layer of intensity that can't be understated. This game was being played in a market where Reese's team was based. The crowd would be predominantly hostile to Caitlin Clark. The arena would be built for noise, for intimidation, for creating an environment where visiting players have historically struggled. Reese had home court advantage in the most literal sense. She had an army of fans ready to back her up. She had the kind of environment where teams typically play with confidence and visiting players often feel the weight of the pressure. On paper, everything should have been set up for Reese to have a statement game. But that's where the pressure becomes tricky and unpredictable in ways that coaches can't fully control. When you have all the advantages, home court, a sympathetic crowd, recent media momentum from your own statements, the pressure actually shifts in a specific and often counterintuitive way. If you win, it's expected. If you struggle, it's shocking. If you fail to deliver while playing at home with the crowd behind you, it's devastating in ways that losses on the road simply aren't. The crowd that was supposed to be an advantage suddenly becomes a witness to your struggle. The home court that was supposed to provide comfort becomes a stage where your failures are magnified tenfold. For Clark, the situation was almost the opposite in ways that created an entirely different pressure dynamic. She was walking into hostile territory. She was the visiting player expected by conventional wisdom to wilt under pressure. She was facing a crowd that wanted nothing more than to see her fail. She was the one who was supposed to be intimidated by the atmosphere, but she was also the one who had the least to lose in terms of expectations. If she played poorly, well, she was on the road in a hostile environment. Anyone would understand the difficulty. If she played well, she exceeded expectations dramatically. The pressure was inverted. The opening quarter began with an atmosphere so intense it felt like the arena itself was vibrating with energy that went beyond normal game excitement. The crowd was absolutely deafening in ways that seemed designed specifically to break the concentration of opposing players. Every time Caitlin Clark touched the basketball, 20,000 people erupted in a wall of sound that was orchestrated with military precision and hostile intent. The boos were bouncing off concrete walls with relentless force. Signs were being held high with messages designed to demoralize. The energy was specifically calibrated and weaponized to make a visiting player uncomfortable. For most players stepping into this environment, this would be the moment where you'd start to feel the weight of the environment pressing down on your shoulders. For Caitlin Clark, this was simply information to process. Angel Reese came out determined in ways that were immediately visible to anyone watching. She demanded the ball in the post repeatedly. She tried to physically impose her will on the paint. She wanted highlight reel finishes that would validate everything she'd said in that pregame press conference just 48 hours earlier. She wanted to take over the game completely, to dominate in ways that would show everyone watching that she belonged in conversations about the greatest players. The intention was clear from her body language. The aggression was visible from the opening possession. What happened next, however, would tell a completely different story than the one Reese was hoping to write. Within the first few minutes, something became obvious that was frankly shocking given her talent level. Angel Reese was missing shots she should make with consistency. We're not talking about contested, difficult, NBA range threes. We're not talking about shots defended perfectly that you might forgive missing. We're talking about layups. We're talking about some of the most fundamental shots in basketball, the ones players have been taking since they were kids at the local park. We're talking about shots that professionals shoot at an elite level on a nightly basis. But in the first quarter, with the crowd roaring and the pressure mounting in ways that were almost visible, Reese's touch at the rim looked off in ways that were concerning. Her finishing seemed rushed. Her footwork seemed off. The confidence that usually radiates from her when she's dominating seemed shaky and uncertain. The ball was coming off her hands in ways that suggested she was thinking too much about the mechanics rather than just letting her instincts take over. By the middle of the second quarter, the problem had become absolutely undeniable to everyone watching. Angel Reese missed 3 consecutive wide-open layups in a brutal stretch that lasted just 6 minutes. 3 in a row. These weren't defensive lapses by her teammates or situations where she was being defended perfectly. These were opportunities where she had space, where she had time, where the only thing standing between her and easy points was her own execution. What made this stretch particularly telling was the contrast between what was happening and what should have been happening according to her pregame narrative about Michael Jordan comparisons. Michael Jordan doesn't miss 3 consecutive layups in crucial moments. Michael Jordan doesn't let pressure affect his touch at the rim. Michael Jordan doesn't struggle with the fundamental aspects of the game when stakes are highest. If anything, the GOAT gets better under pressure. The opposite was unfolding in real time for everyone to witness. The more the crowd roared, the more the moment felt significant, the worse Reese's execution became. The frustration was visible in her body language in ways that couldn't be hidden. You could see it in the way she moved on the court. You could read it in her facial expressions. She was throwing the ball wildly toward the backboard, clearly looking for fouls that weren't being called. Her movements became more erratic, less controlled and fluid than usual. She was visibly losing her composure in a way that players at her elite level shouldn't be experiencing. The poise that usually defines her game was being replaced by desperation. The confidence was evaporating like water in the desert sun. The pressure that she claimed to thrive on was, in this particular moment at least, clearly affecting her ability to perform. Her eyes were looking toward the officials constantly, as if the refs were the problem. As if the missed layups were somehow not her responsibility, but rather the result of unfair officiating or bad luck. But the referees weren't the issue. The pressure was the issue. The media attention had created enormous expectations. The Michael Jordan comparison had created a framework where anything less than dominance felt like failure. She had to prove everything on court in a way that most players never have to face. The comparison wasn't just words floating in the ether anymore. It was sitting on her shoulders every single moment she stepped on the hardwood. What's fascinating about this moment from a psychological perspective is that it revealed something fundamental about pressure and performance that most casual fans don't fully understand. When you make bold claims, when you put yourself out there with comparisons to the greatest players ever, you don't get to hide on an off night. You don't get to have a game where you're just not feeling it and have people give you a pass. Every shot becomes a referendum on your statement. Every miss becomes evidence against your claim. Every successful shot becomes validation. Reese had essentially created a situation where she couldn't just play basketball. She had to validate her own narrative with every possession. The crowd that had come prepared to celebrate her dominance and her team's victory was starting to get nervous in ways they couldn't quite articulate. The energy in the arena was shifting perceptibly. What had been aggressive, confident support for the home team was becoming anxious, desperate. Fans could sense that something was going wrong. They could feel the momentum slipping through their fingers. And as that realization started to set in, the crowd's collective focus began to shift slightly. The roar for Reese was becoming less celebratory and more desperate. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the court, Caitlin Clark was operating with remarkable composure that seemed almost supernatural given the circumstances. While Reese was missing fundamental shots, Clark was making the right plays, finding teammates in rhythm, staying composed. The contrast was becoming stark. One player was visibly struggling under pressure. One player was operating on a different level entirely. One player had made bold claims and couldn't back them up. One player was simply playing basketball at the highest level. By the time that brutal 6-minute stretch ended, it wasn't just that Angel Reese had missed 3 layups. It was that she had demonstrated, in unmistakable fashion, what happens when you promise more than you can deliver in that specific moment. The pressure had found a target, and that target was starting to crack under the weight of unfulfilled expectations. While Angel Reese was visibly struggling with her finishing and losing composure, something remarkable was happening on the opposite end of the court that seemed almost surreal. Caitlin Clark wasn't just playing basketball. She was operating on another level entirely that separated her from everyone else on the court. She wasn't just responding to the hostile crowd and the immense pressure. She was weaponizing it in ways that seemed almost calculated. Every noise from the arena seemed to fuel her rather than rattle her concentration. Every moment of momentum shifting toward Reese's struggles became an opportunity for Clark to accelerate and extend her team's advantage. The turning point came with a moment that would immediately shift the entire energy of the arena and the game in ways that couldn't be reversed. From the wing, with the crowd roaring at deafening levels, Caitlin Clark pulled up from 35 feet, the kind of distance that usually belongs in highlight reels rather than actual competitive games. The logo 3. It's the kind of shot that's so deep, so audacious, that when it goes in, it doesn't just score 3 points. It shifts the entire psychological momentum of the game. It tells the home crowd that their advantage has been neutralized. It tells your teammates that you're operating on another level. The shot swished through the net with perfect rotation, and the arena that had been so aggressively loud went quiet for just a moment. That moment was all Clark needed. From that point forward, it became absolutely clear that this game was entering a new phase where the outcome was becoming less uncertain. Clark started threading the ball through the defense with pinpoint accuracy that was almost unsettling to watch. She wasn't just passing. She was executing an offense at such a high level that her teammates were getting open looks they shouldn't have been able to create. She was reading defenses faster than they could adjust. She was finding cutting lanes that didn't exist seconds before. The passing wasn't just good basketball, it was elite basketball. It was the kind of playmaking that completely changes games and momentum. But Clark wasn't just scoring and passing in some narrow way. She was doing the gritty work that separates good players from great ones. She was attacking the paint against bigger defenders in ways that showed fearlessness. She was fighting for rebounds in situations where she was physically outmatched. She was diving for loose balls. She was showing the kind of relentless hustle that completely changes a game's momentum. Every possession felt like she was competing for something more than just points. She was competing to prove something larger about herself. The statistics were telling a story that would become historic and unforgettable. As the third quarter progressed, the graphic flashed across the screen repeatedly. Caitlin Clark was building toward a triple-double, not just any triple-double, but a career-high one, in the opening game of her second season, in one of the most hostile environments imaginable, under the kind of pressure that would have broken most players who have ever played the game. She was stuffing the stat sheet with assists, rebounds, and points, doing it all while performing under a spotlight brighter than almost any player has ever experienced. By the middle of the third quarter, it had become undeniable and remarkable. Caitlin Clark had recorded a historic career-high triple-double. The numbers were absolutely stacked across every category: 26 points on efficient shooting, 9 assists threading the defense, and crucial rebounds. But the numbers don't even begin to tell the full story of what was happening. What the numbers don't capture is the composure. What the numbers don't show is how she systematically dismantled everything Angel Reese had said in that pregame press conference just 48 hours earlier. The contrast between the two stars was now impossible to ignore by anyone watching the game. One was struggling with basic finishing and looking frustrated. One was operating at an elite level. One had made a Michael Jordan comparison and was visibly wilting under the pressure of that statement. One was simply playing basketball at the highest level imaginable. One was looking toward officials for answers. One was finding solutions on the court. The narrative had completely inverted. What made Clark's performance even more impressive was that she was doing this against a team that was desperately trying to stop her. They were sending doubles at her. They were game planning specifically around her. They knew the rivalry, knew the stakes, knew that stopping Clark was their path to victory. And even with all that attention, even with multiple defenders focused on her, she was finding ways to impact the game at every level. She was making reads that seemed impossible. She was finishing through contact. She was rebounding at a level that shouldn't have been possible given the matchups. The arena that had started as a fortress, designed to rattle the visiting team, had become something different entirely. It had become a stage where Caitlin Clark was giving one of the best performances of her young career. The crowd noise that was supposed to be an advantage for the home team had become almost irrelevant. It didn't matter how loud they got. It didn't matter how many people were cheering for her failure. She had transcended the environment through sheer performance. What's particularly fascinating about Clark's game was the efficiency in every aspect. She wasn't just putting up volume, she was being selective. She was making the right plays at the right times. She was understanding that sometimes the best play wasn't to shoot, but to pass to a teammate in better position. Sometimes the best play was to attack the paint. Sometimes the best play was to fight for a rebound that most players wouldn't even attempt. She was playing winning basketball at the highest level. At the time the fourth quarter arrived, it was clear that this game had become something more than just a rivalry matchup. This had become a referendum on everything that had been said in those 48 hours before tip-off. Angel Reese had made a claim about her trajectory, about her legacy, about being compared to Michael Jordan. Caitlin Clark was answering that claim not with words, but with one of the best performances of her young career. She was doing it in the most hostile environment imaginable. She was doing it while facing a crowd that wanted nothing more than to see her fail. And she was doing it with a composure and excellence that left no room for argument. Late in the fourth quarter, with the outcome essentially secured beyond reasonable doubt, Caitlin Clark caught the ball on the wing in a position where every eye in the arena was on her. The game had already shifted definitively in her favor in ways that were becoming increasingly obvious. The crowd, which had started the night absolutely ferocious and hostile in its energy, had been systematically silenced by her performance. The arena that had been designed and orchestrated as a fortress for Angel Reese and her team had become a stage for Clark's dominance. At this point, the result was essentially clear. What happened next, however, would become the defining image of the entire rivalry. Clark dribbled the ball with purpose, setting up her defender. She didn't hesitate. She didn't play it safe and conservative. She executed a devastating hesitation crossover that caught her defender completely off balance. The defender's weight shifted in the wrong direction at the wrong time. Clark had created the space she needed. She stepped back beyond the three-point line and launched a cold-blooded three-pointer directly in the direction of Angel Reese's position on the court. The ball rotated through the air with perfect rotation. It swished cleanly through the net without touching the rim. At that exact moment, something remarkable and almost surreal happened. The arena went silent, not gradually over the course of a few seconds, not slowly as fans realized what had happened. Instantaneously, 20,000 people who had been screaming, booing, and hurling insults at Caitlin Clark for the previous 2 hours suddenly went mute. The silence was so complete, so sudden, so absolute that you could practically hear a pin drop. It wasn't that the crowd was sad. It wasn't that they were disappointed. The crowd had been psychologically defeated by the performance they were witnessing. What's crucial to understand about this moment is what it represented on a deeper level. Clark didn't silence that crowd with trash talk or disrespectful gestures. She didn't silence them with a celebration or a flex or running to the crowd. She didn't silence them with words or attitude or anything external. She silenced them with basketball. She silenced them with one of the most dominant performances ever delivered in a hostile environment. She silenced them by answering every claim, every insult, every doubt with pure, undeniable excellence on the court. Caitlin Clark simply turned around and looked at the crowd as the ball went through the net. She didn't yell. She didn't celebrate excessively. She didn't dance or mock or engage in the kind of trash talk that could be seen as disrespectful to the opposing team. She simply looked at them with an expression that communicated everything that needed to be said without words. This is what happens when you back up your performance with play. The moment became iconic. It became the image that would define this game for years to come. For Angel Reese, that three-pointer wasn't just another bucket going on the scoreboard. It was the culmination of a complete and utter reversal of everything she had predicted in those pregame comments. While she had been missing layups that she should have converted, Caitlin Clark had been hitting step-back threes in her face from distances that seemed impossible. While she had been visibly frustrated and looking toward officials for answers, Clark had been composing herself and finding solutions on the court. While she had made bold claims about Michael Jordan comparisons, she was being systematically outplayed by the player she was supposed to be competing with for the title of face of the league. The post-game moment told its own story in ways that words couldn't fully capture. Angel Reese did not speak to reporters after the game. This is a telling detail. Players who have had dominant performances usually can't wait to get to the microphone. They want to celebrate. They want to talk about what they did. They want to control the narrative. They want to make sure their perspective is heard. Reese choosing not to speak suggested something profound. She understood in that moment that no words she could say would change what had just happened on the court. The performance had spoken louder than any interview ever could. It didn't matter what explanation she offered. It didn't matter what context she provided. The scoreboard had told the story. The stat sheet had told the story. The silence of the crowd had told the story. The missed layups had told the story. Nothing she could say would reframe what everyone had witnessed, so she chose silence. She chose to let the game speak for itself. When she did eventually speak in brief moments, her responses were subdued and deflective in ways that were noticeable. She talked about the team fighting hard. She talked about coming up short. She talked about some promise that they could beat this team with a full roster. But these weren't the words of someone who had validated their Michael Jordan comparison. These were the words of someone who understood that the narrative had completely shifted. The pressure she had created with her bold statement had come crashing down on her in spectacular fashion. The look on her face when that final three went in was captured by cameras and would become replayed repeatedly. It was the look of someone who realized, in real time, that a prediction had been proven wrong. It was the look of someone who understood that the next few weeks would be difficult because this game would define the conversation. It was the look of defeat mixed with the realization that there was nothing to be done about it now. Coach's perspective in the post-game press conference was particularly revealing in ways that went beyond typical post-game platitudes. When asked about Angel's missed shot at the end of regulation, there was a palpable frustration. He had to acknowledge that they had chances to win, but they couldn't execute when it mattered most. The screen that was supposed to be run for one player wasn't even executed properly. 2 looks at the end of the game that should have been easy shots had rolled out, as he put it. The frustration in his voice was impossible to miss. Stephen A. Smith had made a prediction before this game even happened. He had gone on national television and said that Angel Reese was confusing brand building with actual basketball performance. He had warned her that making Michael Jordan comparisons before proving herself on the court was a dangerous game with consequences that could be severe. He had essentially challenged her to back up her words with actions on the biggest stage available. What happened over the course of that game was a real-time validation of everything Stephen A. had predicted. The prediction wasn't just coming true. It was coming true in the most spectacular, undeniable way possible. The core of Stephen A.'s critique was crucial and pointed in ways that exposed fundamental truths. Reese was building a personal brand, yes. She was becoming culturally relevant in ways that transcended basketball circles, absolutely. She was driving engagement and creating viral moments that dominated social media, without question. But none of that equates to the kind of generational basketball greatness that puts you in the same conversation as Michael Jordan. Stephen A. had articulated a fundamental truth that separates players who have massive brands from players who have actual legacies that transcend eras. One is built on marketability and personality. One is built on dominance. One can fade quickly with changing trends. One lasts forever. What the game had demonstrated was exactly what Stephen A. had been warning about. When brand building and actual performance diverge, court performance becomes the ultimate tiebreaker that nobody can argue with. It doesn't matter how many Instagram followers you have. It doesn't matter how viral your moments are. It doesn't matter how polarizing or controversial you've become. When the lights come on and the game is being played, the only thing that matters is who can actually play basketball at the highest level. And on that night, in that arena, Caitlin Clark had answered the question decisively. The missed layup became iconic, not because it was just a missed shot in a vacuum. It became iconic because it was a missed shot with everything on the line. It was a missed shot after making a Michael Jordan comparison just 48 hours earlier. It was a missed shot when the game was tight and close and definitely winnable. It was a missed shot in a hostile environment that was supposed to be an advantage. It was a missed shot that became the visual representation of a bold claim crumbling under pressure. The image of that ball rolling off the rim would become replayed in countless highlight reels, not as a moment of near victory, but as a moment of failure to deliver. Coach's frustration in the post-game press conference was revealing in ways he probably didn't intend to communicate. When asked about what happened, he talked about fighting hard and being right there. But he also acknowledged a crucial detail that couldn't be overlooked. They had 2 looks at the end of the game, 2 chances to win, and they couldn't convert on either of them. One of those chances was Angel Reese's. For a player who had just compared herself to Michael Jordan, 2 chances to win in the closing moments should have been enough. Michael Jordan would have found a way to convert at least one of those opportunities. The fact that they rolled out was telling. The entire dynamic of the rivalry shifted in that single game in ways that would be felt for the rest of the season. Before the game, there was a narrative that these 2 stars were competing for the same space, the same cultural relevance, the same position as the face of the league. After the game, that narrative had been fundamentally altered. One player had proven, unequivocally, that when it comes to actual basketball performance, there was a clear separation that couldn't be debated. One player was operating at a higher level. One player had answered the pressure with excellence. What's particularly interesting about the aftermath is that the entire sports world immediately understood what had happened without extensive analysis needed. Analysts didn't have to overthink it. The narrative didn't need to be explained. A player had made a bold claim, and another player had answered that claim with a historic performance in a hostile environment. The scoreboard told the story. The stats told the story. The silence of the crowd told the story. Every element of the game had combined to create a complete and utter demolition of the narrative that Reese had tried to build. The Michael Jordan comparison, which had seemed bold and confident just 48 hours earlier, now seemed naive in retrospect. It seemed like a player who had gotten caught up in her own brand, in her own hype, in her own media attention, and had forgotten something fundamental about basketball. Performance is ultimately judged by what happens on the court. You can build a brand on anything. You can become famous, controversial, viral, culturally relevant. You can dominate social media and podcasts. You can have better endorsement deals. But when you step on the court against the best players in the world, all that external stuff becomes irrelevant. Only your performance matters. For Caitlin Clark, the game represented validation in ways that went beyond just winning. Stephen A. had essentially endorsed her as the superior player and the true face of the league. And Clark had gone out and proven that endorsement correct through sheer performance. She hadn't needed to say anything. She hadn't needed to engage in trash talk. She had simply played basketball at such a high level that the narrative answered itself. The triple-double, the efficiency, the composure, the ability to perform under pressure, all of it validated what the analysts had been saying. The lesson embedded in this moment extended beyond just these 2 players into something broader about sports. It was a reminder about the difference between brand and substance, between hype and performance, between cultural relevance and actual excellence. In professional basketball, the court is the ultimate arbiter of truth. You can say anything you want before the game. You can make any comparison you want. You can build any narrative you want. You can create any amount of controversy. But once that ball is tipped, none of that matters anymore. Only what you actually do on the hardwood counts. That's the fundamental truth that was proven. For future generations of players watching this game, it becomes a masterclass in what happens when bold predictions meet actual performance. It becomes a case study in pressure and how different players respond to it. It becomes a moment that shows why backing up your words with actions is always more powerful than the words themselves. And it becomes a permanent part of basketball history as the night when one player's bold claim was answered with one of the most dominant performances in a rival matchup. This game will be remembered as the moment when confidence met reality, and reality won decisively. Angel Reese made a claim about her trajectory, her legacy, and her place in the basketball world. Caitlin Clark answered that claim not with words, but with a career-defining performance in the most hostile environment imaginable. The silence of 20,000 fans is the loudest statement that could be made. When a crowd goes from screaming for your failure to being absolutely silent, you've transcended the moment through sheer excellence. The lesson extends beyond just sports. It's about the fundamental truth that performance always speaks louder than prediction. You can build a brand, create buzz, and generate engagement. But when the real test comes, only execution matters. The missed layups will be replayed. The cold-blooded three-pointer will be replayed. The silent crowd will be replayed. This game shifted the entire narrative of women's basketball in a single night. What makes this rivalry special now isn't just competition, it's proof of hierarchy. One player made a bold claim. One player answered it with dominance. The court had spoken. The narrative had been settled, and the basketball world had witnessed something truly special. Pressure being converted into the kind of performance that changes careers and defines legacies. Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know what you think about this game.